I have chosen to analyze the extract from the book The Shepherd's Life, A Tale of the Lake District, which was released in 2015 and written by James Rebanks. I'd like to touch on the structure of this text at first, and I find the structure to be effective because it builds up pathos and ethos at the same time. It revolves around him reminiscing about his memories from his youth and him further reflecting upon his memories. And all these memories are examples of him getting told about what to do, and sort of scolded for not thinking about the bigger picture and not striving to go to the university. Um, and then, sort of at the midway point, he starts a history lesson about how this people came to be and how they ended up at this lake district. Um, it's a sum up of the last 200 years and where they stand now. And then he ends off with a partial conclusion. Yes. The pathos is built up when he talks about his memories because you see him open up about his personal life, and you feel for him. You have a better connection towards him, and which makes it easier to you to understand his values and ideas and how he feels about all of these things he touches on. And the ethos he builds up is because if someone has to be an expert about this area, it has to be the inhabitants. Um, so he's kind of the only expert you could get. Um, he talks about the history of this place, which build up a trust to him. You seem to he seems very convincing. Yes, and this language he uses to convey these ideas is a mixed match between a lower style and a higher style of writing. I find it to be very effective because when he uses a low style, it's typically because I have some examples here. The first line of the text is I realized we were different, really different. And a typical sign of lower style writing is when you repeat yourself, which he does here. But I think it's just to sort of underline how different these people are, and what he's referring to is the insiders, the inhabitants of this lake district, and the outsiders, the tourists coming to their land and overtaking it, if you could say that. um, and then I have another example where he says this bloody teacher woman thought we were too stupid, um, which doesn't seem that high style of writing because it isn't. He uses bad words, if you could say that, to describe this teacher, but it's just his way. It's his only way of conveying this. He feels very frustrated when he's told to do a certain thing from others because he finds their opinion to be automatically wrong in a sense because they haven't seen it from his perspective before. Yes, and the high style of writing he displays is a vast knowledge about the English dictionary at a whole, and he uses a lot of technical terms when he describes or during this history lesson of his. He talks about urbanization and the industrial revolution and so on. And he uses very unconventional words such as provincial ways and begrudgingly. Yes, which just drives his opinion through. And I find And I think this is necessary to convey a opinion today, because if you don't have some sort of if you don't display some sort of knowledge, you wouldn't be taken seriously. So this mix match is actually perfect for this type of text, in my opinion. If we look at the verbs used throughout this text, it differs from when he's describing the area and the inhabitants from a outsider's perspective or an insider's view. Um, when an outsider would describe the inhabitants, he would use verbs such as rough, dirty, and they have dead end jobs and are very narrow minded. Um, and if an insider would describe them, he would tell you that the people living there are intelligent, clever, and tough, and has gone through a lot of stuff, which is a stark contrast between each other. And when you look at the scenery, the verbs used to describe the scenery, it's the same but opposite. Here, it's the outsiders talking about the scenery as beautiful, wild, and almost epic, and something worth displaying on the UNESCO um, World Thingamajiggy. Yeah. But when an insider describes the scenery, they don't really think about it. They don't describe it. I have a quote here from the text where it says, "But she talked about it and thought of it in terms that we were completely alien to, my family and me." What he's referring to is this teacher trying to convince him to get a university degree. And she's describing this scenery almost as an motivation for him. But he doesn't buy it. He hasn't seen this beautiful and wild and epic nature before. It's just a day-to-day thing for him. Yes, I think the intention behind this text is to spread awareness about growing difference in wealth, if you could say that. It sounds like a stretch, but when you look at it, he says that younger people typically moved out of this Lake District, which only makes this small community even smaller, and the bigger cities even bigger, which also creates this difference in wealth, because in these smaller communities there aren't enough people to um, attend to all these jobs, so they just disappear. And in bigger cities they need more jobs, which creates more wealth, and they have a healthier ecosystem, if you could say that. He's also trying to start a discussion about the forgotten or neglected people, as he calls themselves. I have a quote here where he says that this book will be a story about a family and a farm, but also tells a rounded story about the people who get forgotten in the modern world. So he says that they are left behind and people are not looking back. Essentially, to sum it all up, I have a quote here, which is the last line of this text, where it says, "If we want to understand the people in the foothills of Afghanistan, we may need to try to understand the people in the foothills of England." What he is essentially saying here is sweep your own door before you sweep for others. Yeah, in conclusion, I would say that this is a comment on our behavior and how egotistic our society has become. You value your own beliefs and opinions higher than others, um, because you are essentially just more important. Yeah.